The night was quiet, and the forest around Daniel's small cabin was dark and still. The stars above stretched wide, cold and endless, while the air carried the soft sound of crickets. Daniel sat by the fire inside, reading an old book, when suddenly the calm of the night was broken. A loud explosion echoed through the mountains. The ground shook under his feet, and outside the windows, a flash of orange lit the sky. Daniel jumped to his feet, his heart racing. Something had crashed, and it was close. He grabbed his coat and a lantern, his boots crunching on the dirt as he hurried outside. In the distance, beyond the trees, smoke rose in thick black clouds. A trail of fire cut across the night sky, leading him deeper into the forest. Daniel's instinct screamed to turn back. He was only one man, and whatever had fallen from the sky might be dangerous, but something inside him whispered that he had to see. He had to know. The forest was alive with the smell of burning metal and scorched earth. Branches cracked under his boots as he pushed through. Finally, he reached a clearing, and there it was. A wrecked ship lay broken among the trees, pieces of twisted steel glowing hot. The air was thick with smoke, sparks leaping from shattered engines. Daniel coughed, pulling his scarf over his mouth. His eyes scanned the wreckage. At first, he thought there were no survivors, just silence and ruin. But then he heard it, a faint cry, soft and desperate. His heart clenched. He followed the sound, stepping over sharp debris, until he saw her, a woman, not human, lying on the ground near the wreck. Her skin was pale silver under the moonlight, her hair dark and tangled. Her clothes were torn, and blood stained her side. She clutched something close to her chest. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. It was a baby, small, fragile, wrapped in a thin blanket. The baby's tiny hands reached out, its soft cries filling the night air. The woman's eyes opened, glowing faintly with pain and fear. She tried to speak, her words strange and broken, but Daniel did not understand. She pushed the baby forward, as if begging him to take it. Daniel knelt beside her. His hands shook as he reached out. The baby was warm, alive, trembling with tiny sobs. The woman looked at him one last time, whispering something in her language. Her hand brushed his arm, then fell limp. She was still breathing, but weak. Daniel looked around. The wreck could explode any moment. Smoke and fire grew hotter. The forest might catch fire too. He had no time to think, only to act. He lifted the baby in one arm and carefully pulled the woman onto his shoulder, his muscles strained. But he refused to let go. Step by step, he carried them away from the burning wreck. His lantern swayed in the darkness as the flames roared behind him. The night seemed endless. The weight of the woman pressed heavy on his back. The baby cried softly against his chest. Still, Daniel pushed on, through branches and rocks, guided only by the faint glow of his cabin's light in the distance. At last, he reached his cabin. He kicked the door open and staggered inside. He laid the woman gently on his bed, placing the baby beside her. His breath came in sharp gasps, sweat covering his face, but relief filled his chest. They were safe for now. The baby's cries echoed in the small cabin. Daniel looked down at the tiny life in his arms. He had never seen anything so strange, so fragile, so full of trust. He knew nothing about aliens, nothing about their worlds or their wars. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. The widow, he could tell she was alone, broken, afraid. Open her eyes again. She looked at Daniel, then at her baby. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak again, though he still did not understand. But when her gaze softened, Daniel knew what she was asking. "Help us protect my child." Daniel nodded, his voice firm and steady. "I'll keep you safe," he whispered, though she may not know the words. The baby settled in his arms, eyes closing as it drifted into sleep. Outside, the forest still burned faintly where the wreck had fallen. The night was not over, and danger was far from gone. But in that moment, in the quiet warmth of his cabin, Daniel made a choice. He was no longer just a man living alone in the woods. He was now protector of a widow and her child, and whatever came from the stars, he would face it with them. Daniel sat in the cabin, The smell of smoke still drifting in through the cracks of the wooden walls. His hands trembled slightly as he cleaned the blood from his arms. He could not believe what had just happened. A ship had fallen from the sky, and now in his cabin, an alien widow and her baby were lying on his bed. The baby stirred, making small sounds that filled the silence. Daniel leaned closer. His rough hands, used to chopping wood and repairing tools, suddenly felt clumsy. Yet when the child wrapped its tiny fingers around his thumb, he froze. The grip was weak but full of life. Something in his chest shifted. The woman, Lyra, he did not know her name yet, but he could see her spirit. Opened her eyes. Her gaze darted around the room with fear. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her, and she collapsed back, clutching the baby tighter. Daniel raised his hands, his voice low. "Safe. You're safe here." She did not understand the words, but she caught the meaning. Her breathing slowed, though her body shook with exhaustion. Daniel tore a strip from one of his old shirts and began cleaning her wounds. The cuts along her side looked deep. Burns streaked across her arm. She winced but did not fight him. Her focus was on her child, making sure the baby was warm and alive. When he finished, he brought her water. She hesitated, then accepted, drinking slowly. Her lips moved, whispering something soft, words from another world. Daniel could not understand, but the sound was gentle for a moment. Their eyes met, and trust began to form. Daniel tapped his chest. "Daniel," he said, pointing at himself. Then he gestured to her. She blinked, then whispered something faint. It sounded like Lyra. He repeated it awkwardly. "Lyra." She gave the smallest nod. Her hand stroked her baby's head, as if to confirm her place in this fragile world. The baby reached for him again. Daniel smiled despite the tension pressing on his heart. "And you?" he asked softly. Lyra spoke another short name. The sound like a melody. Daniel tried to repeat it, and the baby gurgled as if amused. For a moment, the cabin felt lighter. But outside, danger was moving closer. A low hum shook the night air. Daniel stiffened. He rushed to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek. A patrol ship hovered over the forest. Its bright lights swept across the trees. Searching, smoke from the wreck must have drawn them. He turned quickly, his voice urgent though quiet. "Hide," he whispered. He pushed aside a rug on the floor, revealing a trapdoor. Lyra's eyes widened, but she seemed to understand. She crawled down into the space, holding her baby close to her chest. Daniel lowered the door, covering it with the rug. The sound of engines grew louder. Shadows passed over the cabin. Daniel grabbed his old rifle and crouched near the window. His heart hammered in his chest. The searchlight swept dangerously close. The walls trembled as the ship hovered. For a moment, he thought they would land. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, slowly, the light pulled away. The engines faded. The patrol ship moved on. Daniel let out the breath he had been holding. His grip on the rifle loosened. Sweat trickled down his back. He hurried to the trapdoor and lifted it. Lyra's wide, glowing eyes stared up at him. Fear was still there, but also relief. She climbed out, clutching the baby. The child whimpered softly. Daniel smiled weakly. "It's all right now." But he knew it was not all right. This was only the beginning. Whoever had destroyed her ship would not stop searching. They would come again. And if they found them here, there would be no mercy. Daniel sat back. The fire burned low on the hearth. He studied the alien mother and her child. His chest ached with the weight of the choice he had made. He could turn them away, leave them to fate. Yet the thought felt impossible. He spoke softly, almost a vow, though he knew she did not understand. "I'll keep you safe, both of you." His eyes lingered on the baby, then on Lyra, who held the child closer, as if she had felt the promise in his tone. The night grew colder. The forest outside was restless, but inside the cabin, something had changed. Daniel was no longer alone, and they were no longer without hope. Morning came slowly, the forest outside covered in a heavy fog. Daniel opened the cabin door, breathing in the damp air. His eyes searched the tree line for any sign of patrol ships, but the woods were silent, only smoke rising faintly in the distance where the wreck had burned through the night. Inside the cabin, Lyra sat on the bed, her baby resting in her arms. Her silver eyes followed Daniel carefully, still guarded, still unsure. Yet she no longer looked at him as a threat, but as something in between, a stranger she needed and feared at the same time. Daniel placed a wooden bowl of porridge on the small table. He pushed it toward her, gesturing for her to eat. She hesitated, sniffed the food, then tasted carefully. The baby gurgled and reached for the spoon, making Daniel laugh softly. Lyra tilted her head, studying his laughter as if she had never heard such a sound. Communication was hard, but they both tried. Daniel pointed to himself again. Daniel. Then he pointed to her. She whispered, Lyra. He repeated it with more confidence this time. The baby tapped his hand, and Lyra said a short name. Daniel spoke it slowly, the sound awkward but warm. The baby smiled, and for the first time, Lyra's lips curved into the faintest smile, too. The day passed with small steps. Daniel chopped wood, showing her the axe. She watched, puzzled but curious. He fetched water from the stream, bringing extra for her. When she touched his arm in thanks, he noticed her hand trembled less. Her strength was returning. But with strength came questions. At one point, she gestured toward the forest, then to the sky, then drew a line across her throat. Her meaning was clear enough. Whoever had destroyed her ship was still hunting, and if they found them, death would follow. Daniel nodded. He had already understood, but hearing it through her broken signs made it heavier. That night, as the fire burned low, Daniel tried again to bridge the distance between them. He picked up a stick and drew simple pictures in the dirt floor. Stars, a ship, fire, people. Lyra leaned forward, eyes following every shape. Then she took the stick from him and drew her own marks, strange symbols flowing into curves and lines. She pointed to one, then to herself. Lyra, she said. Then she drew another, pointing to the baby. The sound was soft, a name Daniel repeated. Her eyes softened. When she heard it from his lips, slowly, she began to teach him small words. He taught her human words in return. They stumbled, repeated, laughed at mistakes. Even without perfect understanding, a fragile bridge was being built. But peace was thin. The night carried more than the sound of crickets. Twice Daniel stepped outside, rifle in hand, hearing distant hums in the sky. Patrol ships were still searching. He stood in the shadows of the trees, watching, his heart pounding. If they found the cabin, there would be no time to escape. Back inside, Lyra sang softly to the baby. The melody was unlike anything Daniel had ever heard. It was both sorrowful and full of love. The sound touched something deep within him, a reminder of a life he once had but lost. His chest tightened. He had been alone for years, and now this small cabin felt alive again. Later, when the baby finally slept, Lyra looked at Daniel. She touched her chest, then gestured to him, then to the child. She said something in her tongue, slowly, carefully, as if she wanted him to understand. He did not know the exact words, but her eyes told him the truth. She was asking if she could trust him with her child, with their lives. Daniel swallowed hard. His voice was steady. Yes, he whispered, I'll protect you. She might not understand the words, but the tone was enough. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she closed her eyes, leaning back against the wall. The night dragged on. Daniel remained awake, watching the fire burn lower and lower. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on his chest. He had saved them, but now he had to keep them alive. Every sound outside made him tighten his grip on the rifle. Every flicker of shadow made him expect raiders. And yet, when he looked back at Lyra and her baby, he felt something stronger than fear. He felt purpose. He felt a bond he had not known he needed. He realized that he was no longer just protecting strangers. He was protecting something like family. The stars outside shimmered through the fog. The forest whispered with danger. But inside that cabin, a new trust was being born, fragile yet powerful. Daniel knew the road ahead would be filled with trials, but he also knew this. He would not walk it alone. The days passed in uneasy silence. Daniel worked hard to keep the cabin safe. He gathered food, chopped more wood, and kept watch on the forest. But his eyes always drifted back to the alien widow and her child. They had become part of his small world, and their presence changed everything. Lyra grew stronger each day. The wounds on her side healed slowly, and though she still moved with caution, her spirit was sharper. She no longer watched Daniel with only fear. Now she studied him with curiosity, sometimes even trust. The baby laughed more, filling the cabin with a warmth Daniel had not known for years. But outside, the threat lingered. At night, Daniel often heard the distant hum of engines. Patrol ships swept the skies, their lights cutting across the trees. Searching, the wreck in the forest was still guarded by smoke and ruin, and he knew sooner or later someone would come close enough to follow the trail back to him. One evening, Lyra sat by the fire while Daniel checked the windows. She picked up a stick and drew shapes on the dirt floor. Her voice was soft but firm. She showed Daniel a circle for a planet, then smaller marks for ships. She pointed to the wreckage, then made a gesture of fire. Then she drew 3 sharp lines. Raiders, he understood. Her people had been attacked, hunted, their ship destroyed. Her eyes glistened as she tapped her chest, then motioned to the baby, then to the broken ship. She spoke words Daniel could not understand, but her meaning was clear. They were the last of her clan, survivors of a slaughter. His stomach tightened. He realized the danger was not random. They had been chased, and the hunters were still out there. That night, Daniel kept the fire low. He sat with his rifle across his lap, watching the window. The forest was too quiet. No wind, no crickets, only silence. His instinct screamed that something was wrong. Then he heard it. The crunch of branches, the faint hiss of metal. Shadows moved between the trees. He rushed to Lyra, whispering urgently. He pointed to the trapdoor, but she shook her head, clutching her child close. Her eyes burned with defiance. She did not want to hide while danger walked near. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. He understood. She was not helpless. She was a mother who had already lost everything once, and she would not run again. The footsteps grew louder. Daniel peered through the window and saw them. 3 figures moving through the trees. Their armor gleamed faintly under the moonlight. Not human soldiers, but raiders. Their faces were hidden beneath helmets, weapons glowing faintly in the dark. They were searching the wreckage and slowly circling closer to the cabin. Daniel's breath quickened. He whispered, "They're here." Lyra tightened her hold on the baby, then looked at Daniel. She pressed a hand to his arm, whispering a word that sounded like family. He felt the weight of it, even without knowing the exact meaning. He doused the fire and motioned for silence. The cabin sank into darkness, only the faint glow of the moon slipping through cracks in the roof. The raiders' voices carried through the trees, harsh and sharp. Daniel gripped his rifle tighter. He knew if they found the cabin, there would be no escape. Minutes passed like hours. One of the raiders stepped closer, his boots crunching on the leaves outside. Daniel's finger hovered near the trigger. Lyra's breath was steady, though her eyes shone with fear. The baby whimpered softly, and Daniel's heart nearly stopped. But then, as if by luck, the raiders turned back toward the wreck. Their voices faded into the forest. Their lights moved further away until only silence remained. Daniel let out a shaky breath. His hands trembled. He had been seconds from firing, and that would have meant the end. When it was quiet again, Lyra touched his hand. Her eyes were wet, but her grip was strong. She spoke softly in her language, words Daniel could not understand, yet her tone was clear. Gratitude, trust, maybe even hope. For the first time, Daniel felt she no longer saw him as just a stranger, but as someone she could rely on. He sat back by the dim fire, the baby now asleep in Lyra's arms. His thoughts were heavy. He had learned the truth. They were being hunted, and the raiders would not stop. The crash was not an accident. It was part of a war he did not fully understand. But one thing he did understand. He could not let them face it alone. As the forest outside whispered with hidden dangers, Daniel whispered his own vow. "No one will take you from me." His voice was steady. His choice was made. Whatever the future held, whatever the raiders brought, he would fight for them, because they were his family now. The morning light spilled through the cracks of the cabin walls. Daniel stood outside, axe in hand, chopping wood. Each swing echoed across the quiet forest. The air was cool. The birds had returned, but the memory of raiders in the night still haunted him. Inside, Lyra cared for her child. She hummed softly, the strange melody carrying through the room. The baby laughed, tiny hands reaching for her hair. Daniel paused his work. Listening, the sound of laughter in his cabin felt unreal. For years he had lived alone, speaking to no one but himself. Now every corner of his home felt alive. When he broadened the wood, Lyra looked at him with eyes that no longer held only fear. She nodded once, a simple gesture of thanks. Daniel smiled, setting the logs near the fire. He tried again with words, pointing at himself. Daniel, then to her Lyra, then to the baby, repeating the small name he had learned. The baby cooed in delight. Lyra's lips curved faintly. She was teaching him, and he was learning. Their days slowly formed a rhythm. Daniel hunted and gathered food, showing Lyra the simple tools he used. She watched with interest, sometimes copying his motions. At night, she shared more words from her language, pointing at objects in the cabin, teaching him slowly. He would repeat clumsily, and sometimes she laughed, a quiet laugh, but real. The bond between them deepened, not only in words but in trust. Daniel fixed a small cradle from spare wood, rocking it gently for the baby. Lyra touched the cradle, her eyes soft with gratitude. She whispered a word Daniel did not understand, but the meaning was clear. The forest around them still carried danger. Daniel scouted often, keeping track of tracks and sounds. Raiders were still searching. He saw faint lights in the sky almost every night. The threat had not passed, but inside the cabin, they built a fragile peace. One evening, rain fell heavy on the roof. Thunder rolled through the mountains. The baby cried, frightened by the storm. Daniel held the child, rocking gently, humming an old tune he barely remembered. Lyra watched him, her eyes shining in the dim firelight. For the first time, she did not look like a widow lost in sorrow. She looked like a mother who had found someone willing to share her burden. Later, as the baby slept, Lyra touched Daniel's arm. She pointed to him, then to herself, then to the baby. Her voice spoke slowly, carefully, family. The word struck him deep. He repeated it, family. She nodded, and for a moment, the storm outside no longer mattered. But danger pressed closer. Tracks near the stream showed signs of movement, not animals. Daniel knew raiders were still near. He prepared quietly, setting traps in the forest, reinforcing the cabin. His mind no longer thought of survival only for himself. Every action was for them, for Lyra, for the child, for the family they had become. That night, as the fire burned low, Lyra whispered in her own tongue, words Daniel could not follow. But he caught his name within her speech. Her eyes lingered on him, steady and unafraid. He understood enough. She was trusting him fully now. Her life and her child's life were tied to his. Daniel felt the weight of that trust, heavier than any burden he had carried before. Yet it gave him strength. He was no longer just a man hiding in the woods. He was part of something larger, something worth fighting for. The raiders would come again. He knew it. The galaxy had forgotten compassion, but he had not. He had made his choice. And as he looked at Lyra and the sleeping child, he whispered the word once more, a vow wrapped in simple truth. Family. The night air was heavy, thick with the scent of rain and smoke. Daniel crouched near the cabin window, his rifle across his lap. His traps were set in the forest, hidden pits, sharpened stakes, and tripwires he had built from rope and scrap. He knew the raiders would come, and tonight felt different. Tonight the forest was too quiet. Lyra sat near the fire, rocking the baby slowly. Her eyes were calm, but Daniel saw the tension in her shoulders. She had lived through battles before. She knew the silence of hunters. The baby whimpered, sensing the unease. Lyra whispered softly, a lullaby in her strange tongue, trying to soothe the child. The first sound came like a whisper, the crack of a branch outside. Then another. Daniel's heart quickened. He moved to the door, peering into the dark. Shapes moved between the trees, shadows carrying weapons that glowed faintly. The raiders were here. He signaled to Lyra, pressing a finger to his lips. She clutched the baby tight, her eyes burning with both fear and fire. Daniel's voice was low, steady. Stay low, stay quiet. He stepped outside, the rifle heavy in his hands. The raiders approached slowly, scanning the forest with sharp eyes. One stepped forward and triggered a tripwire. A log swung down from above, slamming into his armor. He fell with a crash, shouting in a language Daniel did not know. The others spread out, weapons raised. Daniel fired, the crack of his rifle echoing through the night. One raider fell. Another ducked for cover. Sparks lit the trees as plasma bolts tore through bark. Daniel rolled behind a log. Reloading quickly, his pulse thundered, but his hands stayed steady. Inside the cabin, the baby cried louder. Lyra whispered urgently, trying to quiet the child. She pressed her back against the wall, her eyes flashing toward the door. She was not going to let anyone through without a fight. A raider rushed toward the cabin, but his foot hit a hidden pit. He dropped into the hole with a scream. Daniel fired again. Striking another, the forest erupted with chaos. Smoke, fire, and shouts filling the air. One raider broke past the traps, charging straight for Daniel. The human barely had time to aim. The alien slammed into him, knocking the rifle aside. They crashed on the ground. Daniel grappled, his hands straining against cold metal armor. The raider's blade gleamed under the moonlight. But Daniel fought with desperation. He slammed a rock into the raider's helmet, again and again, until the alien collapsed. Daniel gasped for breath, his knuckles bleeding, his chest burned with exhaustion. But he could not stop. Not yet. The last raider aimed at the cabin, his weapon glowing brighter. Daniel's heart froze. Lyra stood in the doorway, her baby in one arm, and in the other she held a piece of sharp metal from the wreck. Her voice rang out, fierce and unshaken. She hurled the blade with perfect aim, striking the raider's weapon. The blast misfired, exploding in his hands. The raider fell with a scream into the dirt. Silence fell. Smoke drifted through the trees. Daniel staggered to his feet, his chest heaving. His traps had saved them. His rifle had held them off, but Lyra's courage had ended the fight. She stood in the doorway. The baby pressed close, her eyes locked on him. Daniel met her gaze. Sweat and blood streaked his face. His voice was hoarse but steady. "It's over." She stepped closer, touching his arm with trembling fingers. Her lips formed a word he did not know, but the tone was clear: gratitude, trust, perhaps even belonging. Together they looked out at the forest, bodies scattered, the ground scarred by fire and blood. Danger still lived beyond the trees. More raiders would come. Daniel knew this fight was only the first of many, but tonight they had survived. Inside the cabin, as the baby drifted back to sleep, Daniel sat beside Lyra. His hand shook, but his spirit felt stronger. He realized something deep. He had not fought for survival alone. He had fought for family. He whispered the word again, a vow carried into the night air. Family.